Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to me to be here. Also, while when I joined this webinar, especially because I'm really in love and I think small ruminants are very interesting animal models and play a very important role in the livestock industry. What I'm going to share with you today is some of the results or findings from when I was a faculty back in Brazil. So I joined the University of Idaho a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago. But when I was in Brazil as a faculty, I had a research program based on nutritional requirements of goats. So for the audience in here, we all know that goats play a very important role in the livestock industry, providing meat and milk. And it's pretty much spread in the whole world. In this map that is from FAO, the way of interpreting it, the darker shades, we can see greater population. And what we can see is that goats are pretty much spread in the whole map. And also that is somehow concentrated in different areas and challenge areas, like harsh conditions. And it's an indicative of the adaptability and resilience of goats. So it's important for us to keep that in mind, and that we need to study or put some more efforts in understanding those animals. And how about in the US? How is it the goat population in the US? What we can see when you see all goats considering Angora, milk, and meat is decreasing. The goat population in the US is somehow decreasing. If you consider this data from 2022 and 2023. But if you look in some specific states, like, and I'm here for obvious reasons, I focus on Western US states. And then you can see in some states, we can see like a raise on the goat population, not only in the milk goat population, but also in the meat. So, and that's an interesting pattern that we can see. So I'm focusing here on the Western states, but also when you look at some South states, that's important. And when we think on goat production, we need to, or we look for improving or enhanced profitability and how we can raise the animals in a more efficient way. And it goes through nutrition. We want the animals to use or to maximize the use of every nutrient that goes in their mouths. And then we want it converted to the main products. In this case, I'm focusing on meat and milk, but also we had other products that are important for goat production, such as fiber or skin and leather and so on. So if we increase the nutrients going to those products, we can maximize profitability. However, as any other animal system, it's not perfect, right? So, and the animals are not 100% efficient, and the nutrients that are not going to the product are excreted, and then it can cause some or can impact the environment in a negative way. What we want from the nutrition-wise is to increase the efficiency of those animals. And it passes through different strategies. And one of the strategies is to better understand the nutritional requirements of those animals. What I mean by nutritional requirements, I really mean that we need to understand how much a certain category of a goat needs to eat from energy, protein, minerals, and so on. If we better understand that and not overfeed the animals, we can increase the efficiencies of those animals. It makes clear that the knowledge of the nutritional requirements are really important. Is really important, sorry. In the majority of the world, so in great part of the world, the requirements of small ruminants and goats in this case, that is the focus on this talk, is based on the NRC, and that is the latest version of the NRC. That is from 2007. And when we look at it, we think, okay, we are in 2023. It means that those requirements should be or might be a little bit out of date. And in fact, that's what we expect, especially when we consider how those books, the nutrient requirements of NRC or even the other from the other countries are based on. I don't know how many of you are familiar of the way they operate, but they base the requirements on publications and what has been published worldwide. So it's not only based in this case, the NRC, even though that is from the National Research Council from the United States, it's based on publications that are out there, and it involves publications from all around the world. So if you think that the data needs to be published, and then it takes a while for the committee to set the requirements, and this latest version is from 2007, it means that it has been a while, almost more than 15 years, almost 20 years, that those publications that were the basis of the requirements were published. If we are talking about different animals, if you think on genetic improvements during this period, perhaps those requirements are not the one that is the most accurate currently. So based on that, my research team and my research program back in Brazil dedicate quite a few time studying the nutrient requirements of goats. And this presentation will be based on that. So my main objective today is to share with you the findings on the nutritional requirements of goats. I'm gonna focus in two main categories, that is growing animals and pregnant animals. That's the main categories that my group dedicate to. But also, I'm gonna share with you some of the results that we got on energy, protein, and minerals, some major minerals. Just to put everybody at the same page, when we think on the methodology for estimating the nutrient requirements of an animal, we generally consider that the nutrients required for each component or for each function. What I mean by that, for example, for an Angora or Kashmir to produce fiber, there will be a needs of nutrients and energy for fiber production. For an animal that is very high active, there will be a requirement for activity. For lactating animals, there will be a requirement for lactation. Growing animals, requirement for tissue accretion. Pregnancy requirements for making that fetus to grow, and so on. So, and what is the total requirement of an animal? It depends on which category, right? So if you think on a growing animals, we need to consider maintenance, so how much nutrients and energy that specific animal requires for maintaining the vital functions, plus what is necessary for accretion. And for pregnancy, so maintenance and what is necessary for allowing that fetus to grow, and so on. I'm not covering the whole thing or all components in this puzzle or jigsaw. What I'm gonna focus today is on growing or requirements for gain, maintenance, and pregnancy. So that's what I'm gonna share with you. We call this method the factorial approach. So the factorial approach then going to be explained to you. In here, I'm just sharing with you a little bit of the methods. Don't run away. It's just to put everybody at the same page what we are covering here and which kind of animals we studied during this period. The first, and I need to tell you, I already told you that is based on my research program in Brazil, but it involves or comprise data from since late 1980s until current data. So of course, don't think that I'm that old. So I was not doing research in the late 80s, but other researchers in Brazil were kind enough or generous enough to share with me their database. So let's go, I'll walk you through this busy figure in here. Which methodology we use? We use comparative slaughter. It means really understanding what was the accretion of nutrients in the body of the animals or in the pregnancy products. Later, on energy-wise, we focus also on respirometry. That was a more controlled way of doing that. And later on, that's the most recent that we have done, we applied some meta-analytical approaches. For the ones that are not familiar with meta-analysis, it's a comprehensive analysis where we consider data from different experiments. And the data that I'm gonna share with you today is mainly data from a meta-analysis. It means that we're considering different experiments that were done since in the last 40 years. We focus on growing animals, and for that we had animals that we consider, we are calling indigenous, dairy and meat animals. And also we focus on pregnancy requirements that is also based on indigenous and dairy animals. Now I'm gonna go and talk to you about the data that we found. And I'm gonna start with the requirements for maintenance. So the requirements for maintenance are what the animals need in terms of energy and protein and minerals. That's what I'm gonna focus today for maintaining their vital processes. It means what is necessary for keeping the body functioning, for temperature control, and so on. For that, we studied animals that were male, castrated males, and females. When I said males, it was intact males, and also indigenous dairies and meat. I'm going to explain to you what we had, what we consider as dairy, meat, and indigenous in that database. On dairies, it was mainly based on sunning goats. We used the similar approach as the NRC used, that for as a meat goat, we consider any animal that was more than 50% or more boar. It means that it involves lots of crossbreds. And as indigenous, we had some crossbreds with native breeds from Brazil, and also some pure Mochotó and Canindé. I don't know how many of you are familiar with those breeds. This is the Mochotó, and this one is Canindé. In terms of body conformation, they seem like a dairy animal, but they're smaller. So what we had as a mature body weight, it's like 40 kilos, 35, 40 kilos for those breeds, just to put everybody at the same page. So based on that database that we had, more than 400 animals that were studied, we had two main questions. Is there an effect of sex and genotype on the requirements for maintenance? And that's what I'm gonna share with you right now. And what we got was, when we studied the sex effect on the energy requirement, we found that there was a sex effect. Just before moving on, I'm gonna share with you or explain to you what we have in here. So this graph shows the heat production against the metabolizable energy intake. And that's the general method that we estimate the energy or the net energy requirements for maintenance. And the way of interpreting it is, even though the animal, if the animal is not eating any energy, so we are not having zero intake of energy, the animal will still produce or having a heat production. And that's why, because the body is still functioning. So that's why we use heat production against the energy intake. And what we found in here was that the requirements of males were different of females. And in males in here, we are considering castrated males and intact males. So the males had a greater energy requirement for maintenance than females. So that's it was our first findings in here. The other thing we explored was how efficient was those animals to convert that metabolizable energy that they were eating into the energy that was necessary for maintenance. And what we found that generally it was 0.63% or 0.63, and it means, and it was not different between sex. But let's stop a little bit and think. We are talking about animals because it's based on body weight. We are comparing a male, let's suppose, a 40 kilos of body weight male and a 40 kilos of body weight female goat. When we do this comparison, instead of thinking that we are comparing similar animals, we are not. It's not like orange to orange comparison, because a male that is 40 kilos of body weight has a different, or it's in a different mature weight of a female. So what we asked next was, how about if we compare those animals at the same mature weight proportion? And for that, we use an approach that was based on this publication. By the way, all the publications that are mentioned in this presentation are cited somewhere in the slides, generally on the bottom part of it, and then you can get that information if you want to. So what we did was, we conducted a study to estimate what was the mature body weight of a sunning goats, and then we found that the females reach maturity at 26 kilos. That was lower than the castrated males and the intact males. It means that if we are comparing, let's suppose, 35 kilo body weight female and intact male, we are not comparing at the same stage of maturity. It means we are not comparing the animals. It is not an orange to orange comparison. So what we did then, we applied similar approach, but now considering the ratio between that current body weight of the animals and the mature body weight, and I'm gonna call this the degree of maturity. So when we compare those animals at the same degree of maturity, we no longer could see an effect of sex. And that's an interesting finding, because it means that if we are comparing the animals at the same degree of maturity, we don't have difference on the requirements for energy. The other find that we got in here, that we can see a trend in here to show that this requirement tends to decrease. In fact, it does decrease as animal gets more mature. It means that it goes from when the animal is very young, we have a greater energy requirement compared to the animal that is mature. And in this case, we are compared up to maturity, or not like above maturity. So our conclusion here is, if you are comparing goats at the same degree of maturity, we had no sex effect. So we can have similar requirements for females, castrated males, and intact males. And how about genotype? We had similar trend. There was a difference between meat and dairy and indigenous goats. Dairy indigenous were not different between them. And the meat goats showed a higher requirements for maintenance, energy requirements for maintenance. Of course, in this case, the efficiency was also different. But when we compare the animals at the same degree of maturity, we no longer saw that, that difference. So similar to what we saw on sex. I'm just I'll make a disclaimer here for you that in this case, we are basing on the body weight for the sunning, as I showed you 2 slides ago. But for the genotype, as we don't have enough data, and not only in Brazil, but around the world, to show what is the mature, when the animals reach maturity, we use an approach that was used, that generally is used for poultry, that is using the protein weight. So we based the maturity, or we're indicating maturity based on the total protein that the animal has in their bodies. So, but the main message in here is that the animals, when we are comparing genotypes at the same degree of maturity, we no longer see a difference between genotypes, the same way we saw with sex. So how about protein? It was the same, and here I'm just showing you quickly the results that we got for sex. So when we're studying the sex effect, we got that there was no difference between sex. For genotype was pretty much the same and very similar requirements. And we could see that when we had the animals, or we investigate the animals, the nutritional requirements of the animals based on degree of maturity, we don't have effect of sex and genotype. I'm not, today I'm not focusing on any specific figure, but more giving you the broader idea of requirements. Similar trend was found for minerals. So when we compare at the same degree of maturity, we don't have sex or genotype effect on the requirements of minerals for maintenance. So there are other things also that we got, what would be the requirements. We start thinking there are other things that will or would affect the requirements for maintenance. Remember when I mentioned to you that maintenance is related to being able, or the energy and nutrients that are necessary to keep their body functioning in a proper way. So, and it involves the temperature control, body temperature control. So if we have animals exposed to different or heat stress or different temperature, perhaps it might affect the requirements for maintenance, especially when we talk about energy. And that's, it's a very valid question, because when we look at this map, that is the thermal climate zones in the world, it goes, or it's based on the range of temperature that we have in the different regions of the world. We have from very cold weather, as we can see here in the poles, in the polar, to very high temperatures, as we can see here on the tropics. If we go back on those maps showing where goats, or where are the goats are main raised, we can see that they're populated mainly on the tropics, right? So it means that perhaps, and we know that for sure, right? That the goats are exposed to very harsh conditions, and including some heat stress. So our question based on that is, does the temperature affect the energy requirement for maintenance? And what we found was, for that, we did not use the comparative slaughter. That's when we start using the respirometry, and that's just an schematic showing how we did that. And here, I'm not sharing with you the results from the requirement itself. What I can affirm to you is it's really affect the metabolizable energy requirement for maintenance, but I thought that was really interesting to show you that what is really affecting here is how the intake changes. So as the temperature increases, and we studied 3 ranges of temperature around 10 degrees, 20 degrees, and 35 degrees Celsius. And I'm gonna apologize for the ones in the US, but I think talking about Celsius for me is easier, and perhaps for some of our audience today. So I'll keep it in Celsius. So we're talking about above 100 degrees in here. So very hot temperature, a little bit like comfort temperature and lower temperatures. What we can see, that's the intake decreases as the temperature increases. And also the efficiency between metabolizable energy and digestible energy. And even if we see metabolizable energy and gross energy, it decreases, especially at very high temperature. It in here was an indication for us that the metabolizable energy for requirements for maintenance would be affected. And also, I'm showing it to you that generally when we move away from the comfort temperature, it affects the methane emission of those animals as well. So the main message in here is, if the animals are exposed to high temperature, especially heat stress, the metabolizable energy for maintenance is a fact. So generally, we need to correct the requirements for that. We are still not at that point, but we're working on that. So let's move on to requirements for growth. And what is the requirement for growth? It's how much energy, protein, and minerals the animals need for accretion, for the tissue accretion. So I mean, adipose tissues, muscular tissues, and bone tissues. Again, we studied indigenous dairy and meat goats, and also had the fact, were able to investigate the fact of sex, because we had castrated males, intact males, and females. So the questions in here were similar to the ones I showed to you. That was, is there a sex effect on the requirements, on the energy requirements for growth? And what we found was, yes. So there was, especially when the animals were getting older at the beginning of their life, there was no difference between sex, but as the animals were getting older, the requirements changed between sex. So the females showed greater requirements for growth compared than castrated males and intact males. But how about when we did similar approach? How about if we compare at the same degree of maturity? And then once again, we found that when we were comparing the animals at the same degree of maturity, there was no longer a sex effect on the requirements for growth. It means that we would have similar requirements for females, castrated males, and intact males when we are comparing them at the same degree of maturity. Here I'm showing you to you then the final results that we got for energy. So no longer considering still considering the degree of maturity, no longer considering the sex effect, because there was no longer sex effect on it. And what we can see is as the animal get more mature, or as they age, the requirements for energy increases. In terms of protein, once again, we did not found any sex effect on that when we were compared the same degree of maturity, and it is relatively constant as animals get older. Regarding the efficiency and generally for growth, if we move to a more mechanistic way for understanding the efficiency for growth, we could see that there was no effect of sex. So that's the line that we should consider. And in here, I'm not seeing or showing to you what was the efficiency for growth, the general efficiency for growth, but also, but I'm sharing to you what is the energy retention based on the protein and fat. And what we can see is there was no effect of sex, and the energy retention when it's based on the protein is less efficient than fat. And that's something that is makes a lot of sense, and we know that. And also can gives us a hint on how those efficiencies change as the animals get older, right? Because the priority of tissue deposition changes. So at the beginning of, so our very young animals, we have a more protein accretion or deposition compared to a more mature animal that we had more fat deposition. So it also gives us a way to go in terms of efficiency. We are not there yet, but still working on that. So to have a more mechanistic way for estimating the efficiency of those animals. Regarding the requirements for the genotype effect, we saw the same. So for protein, that's what we have on the top in here. There was no genotype effect, but there was a genotype effect when we considered the energy requirement for growth. What we, in that case, the meat and indigenous goats, that is this, those figures are greater compared to the dairy goats. So when we compare the same degree of maturity, we no longer could see those differences. So we eliminate that genotype effect. So the overall messaging here is for protein and energy, there is no effect of sex or genotype when we consider the same degree of maturity, talking about maintenance and the requirements for maintenance and growth. Talking about minerals, we found similar results for calcium, phosphorus, sodium, and potassium. The only mineral that even when you consider at the same degree of maturity that we still could find sex effect, we only found for sex in this case, was for magnesium. And it's, we investigate was the reasons behind it, and we believe that's mainly related to the metabolism of those animals, as the females and males have different metabolism, and magnesium is heavily involved on many metabolic pathways. So just to summarize the maintenance and growth requirements, what we can see in here, I'm just showing energy as a representation, what we can see it in there. That is, as the animals grow, the requirements for energy increase. Doesn't matter if it's net energy or metabolizable energy. We also, I'm also sharing with you that is as the average daily gain increase. So if the animals are having greater accretion or are having greater growth rates, the requirements will change as well. And it represents what we got for the other requirements. So just for the sake of time, we're not spending more time on that. I'm gonna move on the requirements for pregnancy. And on the requirements for pregnancy, we mean what is the energy, protein, and minerals required for that fetus to grow. But remember that we need to consider everything that changes in the body of that female when she's pregnant. So, of course, the fetus is growing there. That's a very important part. That is the fetus. But we have the whole uterus that is changing, right? So we need to consider the whole gravid uterus and that. The first thing that we saw then was investigating the changes on the gravid uterus between a single or twin pregnancy, because we know that for small ruminants, it's very common to have twin or triplets pregnancy. We are not able to study triplets or even above that number of fetus, so we focus on single pregnancy and twin pregnancy. The first thing I want to call to our attention is, generally, the feeding systems, they focus only on the last third of the pregnancy. We are talking about that part. It makes sense. That's when the fetus grow the most. But based on epigenetics, we know that we could not neglect the beginning of the pregnancy. And we show that. So there is an increase of the, only considering the mass of the gravid uterus since the beginning of the pregnancy. In our case, we start our studies on 50 days of pregnancy. So that's the first thinking here, that as a take-home message from the pregnancy, that we need to pay attention at least on the second third and the last third of the pregnancy. So thinking on the energy and protein accretion on the pregnant uterus, what we see here, and that's was another question that we asked in that specific study, because it's not common to find data on the requirements for pregnancy. And later on the discussion, if somebody's curious about it, we can discuss a little bit more why I found out why we have a shortage of this kind of data. So based on the requirements for pregnancy for sheep, the one that we had available in the literature is mainly based on publications from the 50s and 60s. So our first question was, can we use, or is the nutrient retention on the gravid uterus different between goats and sheep? What we found that for single pregnancy, it was pretty much similar. So based on that, perhaps we could use similar requirements for goats and sheep when they are on a single pregnancy. But when we had twins, then the requirements are different. So we no longer can use similar recommendations of the pregnancy for goats and sheep. The other thing that we need to pay attention, that is the majority of the feeding systems, they only consider the gravid uterus. But we have something else that changed during the pregnancy. That is the mammary gland. So we have a mammary gland that starts getting prepared for the lactation that will start just after kidding, right? So we need to consider the mammary gland, the change or the energy and nutrient retention on the mammary gland during the pregnancy as a nutrient required for that pregnant females. And we also studied that. And we saw that, of course, that's in the last third of the pregnancy that the mammary gland shows the main difference. But we also had a change happening since the beginning. So on that same study, comparing the requirements for goats and sheep, we see that once again for a single pregnancy, we could see similar energy and protein retention, but when it was on twin pregnancy, it changed between goats and sheep. So moving on to the requirement itself, in here I'm sharing with you what would be the requirement considering different feeding systems that were published at that time. So we focus on the AFRC, that is the British feeding system, the NRC for sheep, and the NRC for goats. So NRC for sheep and NRC for goats. The sheep is mainly based on the studies from Antonello Canas from Italy, and the goats is mainly based on the data and a very comprehensive database from the team of the Equica de la Garza in Oklahoma, that they made a brilliant work, and it was based on the NRC 2007. So we compared the requirements that we found in that study, in our study with goats, considering only the accretion or the retention, energy and protein retention on the gravid uterus, and considering gravid uterus and mammary gland. What we could see is at the beginning of the pregnancy, when we consider only the gravid uterus, it was similar to what we had on the feeding systems. And it makes sense because it's what they base it on. They only base it on the gravid uterus. But when you consider also the nutrient retention on the mammary gland, then we have greater requirements. So that's something for us to keep in mind, that we need to think that the requirements perhaps need some adjustment when we see all the changes on the female body. The other neat thing that we were able to find in that study was that the efficiency is variable throughout the pregnancy. So as the pregnancy progresses, the animal gets more efficient. So that's what we got for energy and for protein. And when we average those efficiency that we found, it's similar to what we had on the NRC or even in the INVA, that is the latest one, so that was published. But once again, perhaps we can or should be losing some nutrients or overfeeding the animals if we are considering single efficiency throughout the pregnancy. Regarding minerals, we also found an interesting pattern. Again, so we compared in here with the NRC, and what we could see is the dotted line is the requirements for recommended by the NRC. We can see that up to 80 days of pregnancy, there was no recommendation, and then that's when they start recommending. So there is something up to 100 days, and after 100 days, it's pretty much a constant recommendation until the end of the pregnancy. It's different from what we found, that is the continuous line. And if we do a simulation, we did that, what we can see is if we feed that female with phosphorus based on the NRC requirement, we might be feeding 50% more phosphorus than what the animal really needs. If we consider potassium, this is even higher. So that's something for us to keep in mind, because perhaps we might be overfeeding those pregnant females. And in here is just a simulation from what we had in terms of the requirements for energy and protein and minerals as the pregnancy evolves. So we clearly had the difference between the requirements between single and twin pregnancy, and it increased as the pregnancy progress. As a final remarks or take-home message from that part is that energy and protein requirements for maintenance and growth of goats are not influenced by sex and genotype when mature weight is considered in the models. Maintenance and growth requirements of major minerals are not affected by sex and genotype, but magnesium, especially for growth. Goats raised under high temperature or extreme temperature show different energy utilization, and it might influence the requirements, especially the energy requirements. Efficiency for pregnancy increase as the pregnancy progress, and that's an important thing to pay attention. And the requirements of pregnancy differs between single and twin pregnancies. Of course, we had a very interesting database based on the data that many people shared with us, but there are many limitations, and I think that's a good point for discussion later on. One of the things is we had in that database a low diversity of diets, and that's why I'm focusing to you on the requirements, because that was our main question. Even though we estimate the efficiency, we did not vary the diet that much to explore all the efficiency. So it serves for our question, but now we need to, people that will work on that needs to test those things on greater diversity of diets. We also have a very limited information on grazing animals, and that's really important for goats. So just to share with you, I really like that picture. So these two photos is from the same place in the state of Paraíba. In this region that's called, it's a semi-arid region that we call Caatinga in Brazil. So it's northeast of Brazil. And we can see over there, we don't have 4 seasons. We have 2 seasons. That is the wet season, when we have lots of rains, and that's the dry season. So it's the same place, and we can see how the vegetation changes. And the goats are here grazing, and they pass through many challenges, and we need to address that to understand how their requirements change and how the efficiency of utilization of nutrients change in certain conditions. And that's, I would say, that is the reality for many goats around the world, even in the US. Also, we don't have anything, to my knowledge, related to activity and what's the activity impact on the requirements, but that's really important for goats. Everybody that has worked with goats have seen a similar scene as in here. Goats are very active animals, and you need to take it in consideration. That database has nothing on requirements for lactating goats, but that's really important. And it's not an easy task to estimate the requirements for lactating animals. So again, the team from Iquica de la Garza has done that, and they had a very strong database on that. But I think we need some more data, especially based on how the efficiency will change in the different as the lactation progress. Also, we need to move on and understand the interaction between nutrients. So we need to, I showed to you in here the requirements in an isolated way. So what would be the requirements for energy, for protein, for minerals? But those nutrients interact, and we need to better understand or improving our understanding of the interaction of nutrients. And last but not least, we need to also It was supposed to be a video, but for some reason, I'm not able to make it work. Okay. So in this video, it's just showing some goats grazing. And I don't know if you are able to see, but they are harvesting only the blade part of the leaves. They're leaving all the midrib. And that's very peculiar on goats. Goats, we all know that goats are very selective, and we need to take it into account when we have the feeding systems. So on future directions, we need to move on more mechanistic approach for estimating or improving our understanding on the efficiency efficiency of utilization of the various nutrients and energy for maintenance, pregnancy, lactation, and growth. We also need to understand the individual variability because everything I showed to you is based on the requirement for a population. And it means it's just like using a medium-sized t-shirt for everybody in a classroom, for example, or even for the audience of this seminar, this webinar. So a medium size would fit 1/3 of those animals, but would be too large or too small for the other animals. So we need to better understand the individual variability on that, to better feed those animals and avoid overfeeding or underfeeding. We need, especially for maintenance, we need to take into account the organs growth, and that's something that we have done, at least to understand the growth of the organs, the different organs in the body, but we need to consider that on the requirements. We need to do the assessment of those requirements in field conditions. And also, I just want to let you know that there is a Brazilian team. So I was leading when I was there and working with a strong group on the requirements for goats. But there is also a team work on the requirements for sheep. And there will be a release of the Brazilian feeding system for small ruminant, and it is predicted to be released next year, first semester of 2024. And of course, on future directions that are not trivial or experiments, it's very expensive and it requires lots of efforts, labor, and investments. So we need to think on data sharing, especially considering small ruminants, because we had less people studying those animals. With that, I want to thank you, some groups, because I'm just sharing with you some data that's based on the meta-analysis I told you, that was based, the majority of the studies were conducted at UNESCO in Brazil and under the National Institute of Science and Technology on animal science. But also I want to honor this man that is Kleber Tomás Rezende. It was the main person that started all the studies on nutritional requirement. And I'm honored to say that he was my major professor and was kind enough to share with me all the database that he collected on the day throughout the years. So those are the other institutions that support those research, and also Brazilian institutions and foreign institutions around the world. So some in the US, some in Italy, that collaborate on this database. With that, I would be glad to entertain any questions if you have. And I'm gonna leave you with the beautiful view from last Monday on the September 11th memorial that we happened on the Perrine Bridge in Twin Falls. So Twin Falls is waiting for you. Thank you, Carmen. I hope you can have some questions.
Yes, that was very informative. And we do have one question right now. So for everyone else still on the call, if you have a question, put it into the Q&A box, and then we will ask our speaker those questions. So the first one I have is, how does expected kidding percentage or litter size impact requirements? They continue with saying requirements for a doe expecting a single versus expecting triplets starting at a similar body size.
So what we see generally on the requirements on the feeding system is not based on the days of pregnancy, is based on what is the expectation of the kid size. So we did not use that just because we thought that generally when we use that approach, we could commit a mistake. What would I expect on that? So that's why we base it on days of pregnancy. That's something that is easy for everybody to measure, right? So where's the day of pregnancy? I know when the females were met. So what we just moving on what would expect on the triplets, I would not say that it would be like triple what we had for single, because generally we had a bigger gravid uterus, but the fetus, every kid is smaller, right? So that generally what we see. So I would not go to say that, but I think that what we'll expect is the requirements for twins would be closer or just a little bit less than the triplets. I don't know if it was, if I answered the question of that person. If it does not, please let us know.
I think that covers most of it. Just kind of would the requirement change based on the
so I would expect to be a little bit bigger, but I cannot tell right now to you what would it be,
Yep. Okay. So I had a question. What was the diet that was given? Like, what was it composed of?
Yeah, so the general diet was based, it was like 50-50, 50% raw phage or forage, 50% the concentrate. And that's the main reason. And the main forage we used, it was similar to a corn silage, but was made as hay. So it was a whole corn plant hay. It means that, and we use that even though it's not as common, but we need, some of those trials are very long, we need to keep similar quality of the forage throughout the time. So if we use a silage, as soon as we open the silo, it starts changing the quality of that diet, right? So the only other thing I'm gonna tell you regarding that, it means that forage has some grains. It really means that we would have, even though it was 50% that hay and 50% concentrate, we would expect to have a higher energy content on that. And the main thing on that, or the main impact on that, is that those animals showed a higher efficiency of metabolizable energy. Just going on nutrition, I know that presentation covered lots of nutrition or basic nutrition, right? It's good seeing that is not as applied, but I can see lots of application on that, especially on the discussion. But still on the nutrition part, there is one number that generally we use as the relationship between metabolizable energy and digestible energy, that is based on cattle, that is 0.82. That's not what we found with goats. Generally, we got from 85 up to 89. It means that those animals are more efficient, right. And it's related mainly with methane emission.
Oh, that's very interesting. And that helps maybe lead into my other question. You were talking about how the doe's efficiency increases as her pregnancy progresses. Did I hear that right during the presentation?
How? Can you
That
repeat?
that her efficiency of feed conversion
Yeah,
increases as she becomes more pregnant
yeah.
as the pregnancy can. So is there like a explanation for that? Like a metabolic explanation?
Yeah, certainly, yes, because when you look at it, so the uterus is increasing, so it's compressing the rumen. So generally we see a decrease or a change on the intake. So
Mm-hmm.
we change passage rate, we change mean retention time in rumen, and generally those animals need to be more efficient to cope with the pregnancy, right? Because
Mhm.
as even though the intake is decreasing, so the requirement is increasing because the fetus are increasing like crazy, right? So there are lots of things related on that. On the intake, there are some hormones effects as well. So there are many things happening on the body of that females that can help to explain that.
Okay. Okay. I'll give another. Oh, you got a question,
I
Chad?
actually have a question. Very nice to meet you. Is it Dr. Teixeira?
Yeah, nice to meet you too, Chad.
Nice to meet you. Very interesting talk. Thank you. I really liked looking at your graphs that showed the NRC recommendation, right, versus actual need of the animal. And kind of thinking of it more from maybe our producer's point of view, what do you think would be maybe a simple way that we could supplement our animals without maybe giving so much excess as we go through pregnancy? Because as a producer, we probably think, well, okay, in the future, they're going to have this high requirement. So let's just start supplementing that now. And if there's no deleterious effects, if there's no negative effects, then what harm is it? Especially if it's not a expensive ingredient like crude protein, right? So, I mean, do you think that there could be any applied method of like trying to match those requirements a little bit better throughout production?
Yeah, I think certainly we need to go on their wallets, right? Because if you are overfeeding at the beginning, since the beginning of pregnancy, thinking, okay, if I overfeed now, there is no negative impact, but certainly will have, especially when you go on the interaction between nutrients. And we are talking about on cows, beef cows or lactating cows, or dairy cows, we already know that because whatever we are feeding those females will impact the protein needs, right? So the offsprings will have an impact, and sometimes even for a longer period than we would expect, not only during the pregnancy. So I think that is one thing. The other thing is they might be wasting money because, for example, if they're adding more nutrients than necessary, or if they're overfeeding those females, there'll be an issue that perhaps they are not sensing right now, but there'll be a thing. So on the practical reasons, I think we need to remember when I mentioned that we need to do on the field assessment. I think the practical way would be, okay, let's feed like that. And then we can join those females during the pregnancy and can see that the offspring are growing in a expected way, that the birth weight is going to be similar. And then at the end of the day, you can see, okay, now let's pencil out and see how much we are saving on not overfeeding those females. And I think we need to cover all those aspects, because if you go only on the metabolic way, like that would be the impact on the offsprings, or what would be the impact on the environment. For example, if you're overfeeding phosphorus, perhaps won't be as catching as it is on the math, or when you put a dollar sign on that, right? So I don't know if you had any other, if you thought in something else.
Yeah. Were you surprised that some of those actual needs were so far below NRC requirements? Because usually our NRC requirements are really only calculated out so that we don't experience like clinical deficiencies, right? And so I think for most of our nutrients, we're probably optimal production could probably, be better if you actually fed more of the nutrients that NRC requires. So were you somewhat surprised seeing that the actual usage was a little bit lower, like through gestation?
No, I was not. I was not for many reasons. I think we're talking about, especially for pregnancy, the information that we had was based on sheep. So we're talking about a different animal. We are talking about sheep from the 50s and 60s. So we're talking about 60 years ago, 70 years ago. And we don't have many of those information. And there is a reason for that. It's not an easy experiment to conduct. It's painful, in many different ways. It takes a long time. It requires lots of animals. And remember that we need to control and need to know, first of all, that female is pregnant. And then if it's single or twins. And why did we're not studying triplets? Because it would take like even longer. Because when we need it, of course, it does not come, right? So we had more twins than we were expecting. So in that specific experiment, we used a little bit more than 100 animals, but we recruit 300 animals to get those 100 animals for that experiment. So it's very time demanding, it's very expensive, and many other things that we could talk in here. So anyways, answering your question in a more direct way, it's not a surprise to me. I think we need to go and adjust those requirements. Certainly we do. Not only for pregnancy, especially talking about minerals, but also for growth. Dr. Solomon, now she's retired, but she dedicated great part of her career studying minerals for small ruminants, especially goats. She was showing that sometimes what we are having for the requirements are more, that is on the feeding systems, is more than what we had on the animals really respond to. We are not, of course, reaching toxicity, but perhaps we are overfeeding.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah. Well, I definitely agree that I think the NRC needs consistently, are checked, right? To our changing animals, our changing potential diets and things like that. So I think that this is great that you've done some of this, especially with goats, that is probably forgotten more often than our sheep counterparts. So
yeah, certainly. And I expect that they should be soon recruiting the new committee for the requirements, because it has been more than 15 years now. So when we look at the dairy NRC, so that's now nascent, it was the difference between both publication was 20 years, and took them for the committee 7 years from when they first met to the publication of the book. So I think they should be talking about it soon.
That would be great. Yeah. Well, thank you for such a great presentation. It's been very nice to have some good research on goats being able to be presented, and I definitely welcome anything else that you have in the future. We'll have to have you back to give us some more information one day. I think that's all the questions we have for today. So this webinar has been recorded, so we will post it up on our YouTube in the next couple weeks, and we'll see everybody back here in October for our October webinar. Again, it's always the second Wednesday of the month at noon. So thank you, and we'll see you next time.